The lady from the church asked me to pray for her husband's soul. I said, "Of course. When did he die?" And she answered, "Tomorrow." No child should die alone. That's why I decided to let my son invite some friends over. Someone started having a coughing fit at my workplace. The problem is that I work alone in a morgue. Never knock on your door from the inside at dawn. The devil can knock on the outside. These macabre stories and others that can't be told on the channel, you'll see in the Cursed ebook. The link is in the comments. Buy it now. The handbook was more than just a guide. It was a premonition wrapped in officialese. The moment Jack laid his hands on it, the cover felt unnaturally cold, as if it had absorbed the dread of countless souls before him. The title, "Read the Rules Before Being a Policeman," seemed to pulse with a life of its own, whispering dark promises of knowledge too dangerous to know. Each page was a descent into madness, the ink seeming to shift and writhe under the flickering light. The rules weren't just instructions. They were curses disguised as protocols, compelling the reader to adhere to unspoken laws of the night. The deeper Jack read, the more he felt an invisible gaze fixated upon him, as if unseen eyes were peering through the very fibers of the paper. Rule 1 was deceptively simple. Always follow orders without question. But as Jack read, he realized that this was a command not just to obey, but to forfeit his very autonomy. The words seemed to echo in his mind, distorting his sense of reality. He could almost hear the faint whisper of an unseen entity urging him to surrender his will. Rule 2 instructed him to never enter the precinct after midnight. The reason was left ominously vague, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent awaited within those walls. Each tick of the clock seemed to draw him closer to an inescapable doom, as if the handbook itself was a vessel guiding him towards the darkness lurking behind the precinct's locked doors. As he flipped to Rule 3, he saw a cryptic warning. The shadows had their own jurisdiction. The page was smeared with what looked like dark stains, possibly blood. Jack's heart raced as he imagined the shadows becoming entities with malevolent intent, living in a world parallel to his own, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Each tool was described in unnervingly precise detail, their uses hinting at rituals and rites that were better left unexplored. Jack's fingers trembled as he imagined what they were truly meant for. The 5th rule was a chilling mandate: respect the silence of the dead. Jack was warned never to disturb any location where the deceased had been. The text seemed to vibrate with a sinister energy, and Jack couldn't help but think of the restless spirits that might linger, their anger simmering just beneath the surface. Rule 6 detailed an unsettling procedure for handling anomalous events. The instructions were elaborate, involving a series of steps that led to an inevitable confrontation with something beyond comprehension. Each directive seemed to pull him further into a realm where sanity was a fragile illusion, and the unknown was a tangible, lurking threat. By the time Jack reached Rule 7, he was practically shaking. It instructed him to maintain vigilance during the night shifts. The examples given were disturbing, recounting incidents of officers who had vanished or gone mad after ignoring strange noises or eerie occurrences. The implication was clear. Vigilance wasn't just advised, it was necessary for survival. Rule 8 warned of the concealed room, a place within the precinct that was only to be entered if absolutely necessary. The description was vague, but hinted at something ancient and malevolent. Jack felt a chill as he imagined what lay hidden behind those walls, a darkness that had been contained for reasons he was not yet privy to. As Jack continued, Rule 9 demanded total isolation during investigations. It instructed that no outside communication should be allowed under any circumstances. The idea of being cut off from the world, alone with whatever horrors the investigation might uncover, was almost too much to bear. It was as if the rule was designed to isolate him from sanity itself. Rule 10 was the most ominous yet. Do not question the origin of the handbook. It warned that doing so could bring about untold consequences. The implication was terrifying. There were forces at play that were beyond comprehension, and even seeking to understand them could be fatal. The deeper Jack delved into the handbook, the more he felt like he was being watched. Each rule seemed to anticipate his every move, guiding him towards a fate he could not escape. The air around him grew colder, and the shadows in his room seemed to lengthen and twist, as if eager to consume him. With every page turn, the handbook's rules began to echo in Jack's mind, creating a chorus of dread that grew louder and more insistent. The rules were not just instructions. They were a litany of impending doom, a guide to navigating a world that was far more sinister than he had ever imagined. The more Jack read, the more he began to feel a sense of inevitability. It was as if the handbook was not just a guide, but a prophecy, foretelling a future where he would be ensnared in a web of darkness and despair. The thought of becoming a part of this twisted narrative filled him with a terror he couldn't escape. Rule 11 introduced a disturbing concept: unseen forces. It described entities that operated outside human understanding, whose motives were inscrutable and whose presence could not be detected by normal means. Jack shuddered at the thought of these forces being a part of his new reality, their influence subtle yet pervasive. Rule 12 warned of echoes of the past, stating that the precinct held memories of all who had worked there. The idea that the building itself could retain the essence of those who had suffered within its walls was deeply unsettling. Jack couldn't help but imagine the anguished voices of the past calling out to him. Rule 13 dealt with possessions, both of objects and people. It detailed how to handle items that seemed to exert a malign influence, suggesting rituals and procedures that seemed more occult than procedural. The thought of items becoming conduits for dark forces was enough to make Jack's skin crawl. Rule 14 was a chilling reminder to avoid the unspoken. It warned against speaking aloud any of the forbidden knowledge contained within the handbook. The fear of what might happen if he were to utter these words out loud was palpable, as if the very act of speaking them could summon forces beyond his control. Rule 15 instructed to protect the secrets, emphasizing that certain truths were too dangerous for anyone to know. The fear of being complicit in keeping these secrets and the consequences of failing to do so loomed large. The idea that there were secrets that could bring about unimaginable horrors was almost more than Jack could bear. As Jack approached Rule 16, he found it warned of the lost. These were individuals who had once been part of the precinct, but had vanished without a trace. The handbook suggested that they had become part of the precinct's dark tapestry, their fates sealed by the rules Jack was now bound to follow. Rule 17 detailed sanctioned insanity, describing how certain experiences could lead to madness if not handled properly. The idea that encountering the supernatural could drive him insane was a constant, nagging fear. The handbook seemed to promise that madness was an inevitable part of the job. Rule 18 spoke of the echo chamber, a room in the precinct where disturbing phenomena occurred. The description was vague, but suggested that anyone who entered might be overwhelmed by their own darkest fears made manifest. The thought of facing his own nightmares was almost too terrifying to contemplate. Rule 19 was a chilling reminder to avoid the Inquisition. It described a process where individuals who questioned too much were subjected to a terrifying ordeal. The idea that there were consequences for seeking the truth was a constant, oppressive weight on Jack's shoulders. Rule 20 warned of the Watchers, entities that observed and recorded every action taken within the precinct. The notion that there were beings possibly beyond human comprehension monitoring his every move was a constant source of paranoia. Jack could almost feel their eyes on him, scrutinizing his every action. Rule 21 instructed Jack to honor the boundaries. It emphasized that certain areas of the precinct were off-limits, with dire consequences for those who crossed them. The idea that there were forbidden zones, each holding its own malevolent secrets, filled Jack with an almost paralyzing fear. Rule 22 dealt with transgressions, outlining the severe repercussions for breaking any of the handbook's rules. The descriptions were vague, but hinted at punishments that were both physical and psychological, designed to ensure compliance through fear and suffering. Rule 23 warned about the unseen, entities or phenomena that were imperceptible to most, but could exert a powerful influence. The idea that there were forces at work beyond human perception, subtly manipulating reality, was almost too disturbing to process. Rule 24 was a grim reminder of the cost of knowledge. It suggested that gaining too much understanding could come at a steep price, often involving personal sacrifice or loss. Jack couldn't help but fear what he might lose if he continued to delve deeper into the handbook's secrets. Rule 25 was an unsettling directive. Beware the forgotten. It referred to entities or phenomena that had been lost to time but still retained a malevolent presence. The thought of encountering something ancient and forgotten was a source of deep, abiding dread. Rule 26 detailed the fractured reality, describing how reality itself could become unstable when dealing with certain phenomena. The fear that his perception of the world could shatter at any moment was a constant, gnawing anxiety. Rule 27 warned against the abyss, a metaphorical or literal void that could consume those who venture to close. Rule 28 spoke of the puppeteers, entities that manipulated others from the shadows. The idea that there were beings orchestrating events behind the scenes, influencing every aspect of his life, was a source of constant paranoia and fear. Rule 29 was a chilling reminder to trust no one. It suggested that everyone, even colleagues, could be part of the larger, malevolent scheme. The fear of betrayal and deception was ever present, casting a long shadow over every interaction. Rule 30 was a disturbing edict. Embrace the fear. It suggested that acknowledging and accepting fear was a necessary part of the job. The idea that he would need to become comfortable with terror was a daunting and unsettling prospect. Rule 31 warned about the invisible chains, a metaphor for the unseen forces that bound and controlled individuals. The thought that he might be ensnared by these chains, invisible yet unbreakable, was a source of constant anxiety. Rule 32 instructed to guard the threshold. It described a boundary that must be protected at all costs, suggesting that crossing could unleash horrors beyond imagination. The idea that there was a critical line between safety and catastrophe was a terrifying concept. Rule 33 detailed the warnings, cryptic messages that appeared sporadically, often too late to be of any real use. The idea that there would be ominous signs of impending doom that could never be fully understood or acted upon was deeply unsettling. Rule 34 spoke of the eternal vigil, a constant state of alertness required to combat the ever-present threats. The thought that there could be no respite, no safe haven, filled Jack with an overwhelming sense of dread. Rule 35 was a chilling reminder of the haunting, suggesting that the precinct itself was alive with malevolent energy. The idea that he would be working in a place that was inherently evil was a source of constant, creeping fear. Rule 36 detailed the oblivion, a state of complete and utter darkness where all things were lost. The fear that there could be a place where everything, including his very existence, could be obliterated was almost too much to bear. Rule 37 warned about the devouring silence, a phenomenon where silence itself could become an oppressive force. The idea that silence could become a weapon against him was a deeply unnerving concept. Rule 38 was a grim reminder of the eternal witnesses, entities that observed every action and recorded every transgression. The thought that he would be under constant surveillance by beings who never missed a detail was a source of profound paranoia. Rule 39 spoke of the void, the place where all light and hope vanished. The idea that there was an ultimate, inescapable darkness waiting to consume him was a constant, gnawing fear. Rule 40 was a chilling warning to never speak of the unseen. It suggested that even discussing the malevolent forces could bring about their attention. The fear of invoking these forces through mere conversation was a constant source of anxiety. Rule 41 detailed the reaping, a process where those who fail to follow the rules faced a terrifying fate. The idea that noncompliance could lead to a reckoning of unspeakable horror was almost more than Jack could comprehend. Rule 42 was a disturbing command. Witness the unimaginable. It suggested that certain experiences were inevitable, and that witnessing them would forever alter his perception of reality. The idea that he would be forced to confront horrors beyond imagination was almost paralyzing. Rule 43 warned about the eternal night, a perpetual state of darkness that could envelop those who failed in their duties. The idea that he could be condemned to an endless night of terror was a constant, looming dread. Rule 44 described the cursed duty, suggesting that the job itself was a source of unending torment. The thought that being a policeman was inherently cursed, bound to a fate of suffering and horror, was a deeply unsettling notion. Rule 45 was a final, chilling warning, the price of knowledge. It suggested that understanding the handbook's true nature would come at an irredeemable cost. The fear of discovering the full extent of the darkness within and the price he would have to pay was a terrifying prospect. Until next time, thank you.